Welcome back to movementprofessional.com. So we're going to take a look at the mobile pelvis here to understand how it works during respiration or while we breathe, and then how that affects our hip position when we're doing something like the Brettzel. So first off, when we inhale, we want to think of the diaphragm dropping down, pushing down into the guts. And then that's going to make the pelvis kind of open up like this to receive the guts. So an inhale is going to take the iliums here, the ASISs, and move them away from each other. And then that will also likely counter-nutate the sacrum here. What that does to the acetabulum, where the hip is it moves it into a position that's biased towards external rotation, flexion, and abduction. The opposite then tends to happen during exhale. So when we inhale, everything opens up. Exhale, we want to compress inward, so we want the belly to pull in, and then that's going to bring these ilium closer together, and that will create a nutation of the sacrum, and then an internal rotation, extension, and adduction of the hip as the acetabulum moves in. So that's important to know for when we're in the Brettzel position, where we have one leg in this flex position and this other leg in a more extended position. We want to make sure that we have this pelvis stacked, or we want to make sure that the trochanters are stacked. So this trochanter of the femur is stacked over that one. Because if we don't, any type of motion where we're trying to bring this knee back into more extension, if we don't keep this stacked, it's going to be some type of compensation at the pelvis. So one of the most common compensations would be this knee comes back, the pelvis just orients forward. So we actually do still keep the trochanter stacked, but we're just arching the back and rotating the pelvis forward. And nothing really happens here at the hip, because as this knee goes back, the pelvis just follows along, and then we just get really an extension in the lumbar spine. Another common compensation that's often seen in the Brettzel is that we bring this knee back, we're trying to twist, and then this trochanter goes in front of this trochanter, and what that usually will do is create an opening of the ilium on this side a little bit, so it moves this hip into more external rotation, which is farther away from the hip extension that we're looking for. So no matter if we're starting with the thoracic bias setup or the hip bias setup, we always want to have the pelvis stacked here, and when we try to move into more extension of this hip, we want to make sure that we're generally exhaling and trying to compress these two ilium together, so that that stabilizes the pelvis. And then any movement that we have, bringing this knee back with a stacked pelvis, can be more hip extension. We're also going to tend to have a little bit more movement into adduction here if we breathe out and compress the pelvis, and then that will also be coupled with a little bit more hip extension. So that would be what we want to be thinking about when we're doing our Brettzel, at least at the hips and the pelvis. We got to make sure that the pelvis stays stacked. We want to think about exhaling is going to compress the front of the pelvis here, which will help to promote adduction and extension, especially on that bottom hip. If you have any questions, you can go to movementprofessional.com. I'll see you next time.